get prices down now. Donald Trump steps up the pressure on major oil producers. Will OPEC appease the U.S. president? And what about Iranian oil exports being blocked by U.S. sanctions? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hoda Hamid. OPEC leaders and their allies are due to meet on Sunday in Algeria to discuss something which affects us all, the price of oil. The price of Brent crude oil is close to a 4-year high, trading at just under $80 a barrel. That's still well short of the 2008 peak of $147. Oil prices have risen by around 40% in the past year, and President Donald Trump is demanding prices fall before midterm elections in November, which will also be a critical test of his popularity. He also wants oil producers to make up for the fall in Iranian exports because of the reimposition of U.S. sanctions. Trump tweeted, "We protect the countries of the Middle East. They would not be safe for very long without us, and yet they continue to push for higher and higher oil prices. We will remember, the OPEC monopoly must get prices down now." Trump's call poses a dilemma for Saudi Arabia. If it toes his line, some OPEC members may perceive Riyadh as doing Washington's bidding at their expense. On the other hand, the kingdom can hardly displease its strongest ally. To discuss this and the OPEC meeting in Algeria, we are joined from London, Manouchehr Takin, an independent oil and energy consultant and former OPEC official. In Moscow, Mikhail Krutihin, an oil and gas analyst and partner at RusEnergy Consulting Agency. And also there is Sami Hamdi, a Middle East analyst and editor of the magazine International Interest. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Sami, let me start with you. Does Trump have a point when he says that Middle Eastern countries are pushing the prices higher and higher?
I think we have to remember what caused a lot of the chaos in recent years in the Middle East in terms of economic diversification, some of the grand moves that Saudi Arabia, the UAE and other Arab countries have taken. It was the low oil prices. Until low oil prices, Saudi Arabia saw no need to engage in economic diversification or indeed to pursue Vision 2030 or the NEOM cities or the like. What's even more ironic is that the low oil prices was caused by the US shale industry, which seemed to put more and more oil in the market, driving the prices down, and Saudi Arabia actually started fighting the US, trying to outdo the US by flooding the market with oil to bring the price so low that shale would not be feasible. So I think with regards to Donald Trump about whether they want to bring the prices up, this is very true. The OPEC countries, all of them, they benefit from a high price. Let's remember why Venezuela is a failed state today. It's a failed state because the low oil prices sent the economy crashing. A high oil price gives reprieve for a lot of these countries, these OPEC countries, who are suffering from the economic difficulties as a result of years of relying on oil. So in other words, when the oil prices start going back up, these OPEC countries find that they have more revenue, they have more money in order to enact infrastructure projects or the like within their particular countries. So in short, what's particularly ironic is that the US, which forced a lot of these countries to bend over backwards as a result of the low oil prices, as a result of the shale oil industry, is now demanding that the OPEC countries bring the oil prices back down once more and to suffer further as a result of Donald Trump being scared of what might happen in the midterm elections.
So, Manouchehr, now OPEC countries and non-OPEC countries are meeting tomorrow in Algeria. What do you think is going to happen here? What will be the focus of the conversation?
Well, let me say that tomorrow is the joint ministerial monitoring committee meeting. It's not the whole, all the ministers of OPEC countries and the non-OPEC which have joined together in the last 2 years. I think it's Russia and other non-OPEC countries, and then Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Kuwait, and so on.
Let's say some of the important ones out there.
Is there. Yes, they are, their job, as I'm saying, is that they are not supposed to decide on what to do. They are a technical group, as I say, a market monitoring committee, to look at the information that the technical analysts and technical group within OPEC and non-OPEC have given them, and look at it, examine it, consult with each other, look at the supply-demand balance in the world oil market. They are really business people. And then also foresee what in the next 5-6 months will be the performance of the global economy. It's going to be a boom, bust, a recession, which of course would affect the demand for oil, and then the supply of oil from the United States and others that technical people have tried to estimate for the next few months. And out of that, they will see how much is the demand for OPEC as a whole and for OPEC, non-OPEC group that are part of this joint operation, which have limited their supply. That is their job. Of course, having done all this and discussed with each other, consulted their excellencies with each other, then of course they have to look at the political aspects, the one that you made an introduction already. So I want to say they don't make a decision. They try to summarize and brief the full ministerial conference of OPEC, which is to meet on the 3rd of December. But of course, their ideas and comments would influence what the other ministers would do. And so we can now discuss what these people might decide or might prefer, might recommend. But let's say it is not, they would not decide on an actual policy that OPEC would follow.
Okay, and Mikhail, what's Russia's role in all of this? I mean, over the past few years, relationships between Moscow and Riyadh have grown closer. There is talk that maybe these two countries together trying to fill the gap that will be left because of the Iran sanctions.
Well, Russia's role is very specific. Basically, when Russia agreed to decrease oil production, it was against the benchmark of October 2016, when the Russian oil production peaked for some domestic reason. And after that, it fell down to the regular level, again, absolutely naturally. And the Russian Ministry of Energy said it was carrying out the promise it gave to OPEC. Basically, Russian oil companies are producing at the maximum of their capacity. And they are not prepared to increase production to accommodate the wishes of Saudi Arabia or President Trump or anyone else. Essentially, next year or maybe a year from now, Russian oil production is going to start declining. It has already peaked. The decline will be caused by the deterioration of oil reserves, which the majority of oil which remains still in Russia, 70% of that is hard to recover. And it is difficult to produce this oil at the current level of prices. So please do not expect that Russia is going to increase oil production. On the contrary, it is going to decrease it.
So, Sami, in view of that, it seems that the onus will fall again on the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. Now, what will be their mood, considering this tweet of Donald Trump, who basically said, you guys are safe because we keep you safe? I'm sure they're not very happy about that.
We have to remember that Saudi Arabia and the UAE don't actually want to increase production. Saudi Arabia has been giving lip service to Donald Trump until now. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has asked Saudi Arabia to increase production. There was a tweet a few months ago where he said that Saudi Arabia had promised, and then that tweet was removed later on, or he went back on that particular tweet. Saudi Arabia does not want the prices to go down. Why? Because the investment that they expected in Vision 2030, the Aramco valuation that they had, was not what they expected. The amount of money that they expected to come into Saudi Arabia from these various economic projects has not matched their expectations. So in other words, the higher the oil price comes, the more of a buffer, the more of a cushion that they have in order to come up with a new plan, in order to assess their situation and how to come up with a better solution. The problem is that Trump is applying very heavy pressure on Saudi Arabia. Although there's this view that Saudi Arabia and Trump are very, very close allies, we need to remember that Trump flip-flaps based on how much money comes into the US. So for example, initially he supported the Qatar blockade, and then in April this year he invited the Emir of Qatar to Washington and then sent his advisors to Riyadh to put pressure on them to stop the blockade. So in other words, Trump is flip-flapping, and the Saudis know that when Trump threatens them and threatens to lift the support that he's been giving them, they know that he's particularly serious. Saudi Arabia will go to the OPEC countries, but the OPEC countries know that Saudi Arabia deep down does not want the oil prices to go down either. So it'd be very interesting, because now it's a matter of sovereignty. Is Saudi Arabia really a puppet state to the extent that they will have the nerve to go to the other OPEC countries? I'll tell them, guys, look, we need Trump, so you guys need to increase production and bring the low oil prices down. It would be absolutely incredible by all standards for Saudi Arabia to sit and look these OPEC countries in the face and tell them that Trump told me to bring the prices down, so we have to bring the prices down, even though that is Saudi Arabia that will be taking the hit. So I think it's quite profound the way in which Trump has caused this scurry in the OPEC countries, all because he is suffering or potentially suffering from the midterm elections, whereby his base are the ones who are becoming very much affected by increased oil prices.
Okay, well, Manouchehr, you know OPEC from the inside very well. Now, we have a situation where at the heart of all of this is obviously the looming sanctions on Iran, and they will kick in just 2 days before the midterm elections. Now, so when everybody's in the room, or even at the moment, you can hear statements coming out from all sides. Saudi Arabia, according to Sami, is in a difficult position, doesn't want to be seen as the puppet of the Trump administration. Iran, on the other side, has a lot of veto power within OPEC and is actually putting Saudi Arabia on the spot, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. You see, there is so much being said as to political differences recent months between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There have been greater political differences between these different countries within OPEC. Iran and Iraq were at war with each other in 1980s. But I want to emphasize that these ministers, when they get together looking at the oil market, they are really more concentrating as business leaders and trying to understand the market and see for what is good for all of them to do. Of course, there are priorities, short-term, long-term, but those are all, I would say, technical decision-making. And this is what would happen here as well.
But when, sorry for interrupting,
yes, go ahead.
But when the Iranian oil minister says, I will block any OPEC decision that poses the slightest threat to Iran, how are we supposed to see this or understand this?
Well, these are statements which are made by ministers before they actually meet in an OPEC full official conference, which will be on the 3rd of December. Whenever there are levels of prices being high, too low, the different ministers make a statement. They're usually less, obviously, but on occasions in the past, they have made a statement. So there is naturally the wish of Iranian minister and Iranian government is that when Iran is put in a corner, and the United States and President Trump and the US Department of Treasury are blatantly and in a bullying way, they tell all the Iranian oil customers, those who buy oil from Iran, they threaten them that they should stop buying oil from Iran. Otherwise, they will put this and that. If they're operating in America, they wouldn't do this, or banking limitations, etc. This is a bullying tactic. So obviously, Iranian people, Iranian government are upset that a big power as such is trying to act in this way, very open-minded, using force. And so the reactions are that, look, we expect our other members of OPEC that we are in this joint club, we have been together for since 1960 and so on, to not to give in and try to also accommodate Iran. And this is an obvious demand. But I'm sure even the Iranian ministers and others, they do agree, as we had done in the past, that OPEC as a whole doesn't want the prices to go too high and not obviously too low. They don't want the price to go down because they want to have good revenue, as Mr. Hamdi just mentioned. They don't want to lose revenue. But I want to say that it is not only one way. In the past, in the history of OPEC, there have been occasions that OPEC as a group increased production, they agreed, and increased production to get the prices down. And they might They have done it in the past. But on this occasion, unfortunately, it is mixed with these rhetorical statements and political pressure from the United States and so on and so forth.
I'm just going to bring in Mikhail from Moscow. Mikhail, you said earlier that Russia cannot increase its production by very much. So there is supposedly going to be a gap of 2 million barrels. How do you think it's going to be filled?
Well, basically, I do not think it will be Russia that is going to fill in this gap. For Russia, cooperation with OPEC is very important for several reasons. First, because of the Russian virtual contribution to the joint effort, not material contribution in the form of holding production down or increasing production, but in the form of oral interventions, various declaration of solidarity, and sometimes Russia reports that it is changing the level of production to accommodate production to the wishes of OPEC. But basically, it is not doing anything of the kind because it is the companies that determine how much oil they are producing. But it is very important even orally, because the level of cooperation is a factor to push the prices up. And higher prices are very unnecessary for the Russian government, because basically the oil companies in Russia get very, very little from high oil prices. We have a sliding scale of taxes, and if the oil price goes up, it is the government that takes this profit, this incremental profit, but not the companies. They get just a very small proportion of the incremental value.
Okay, and Sami, what other country could step up its production? Is Iraq able to do that, for example?
I think Iraq is mired in its own issues. Basra is full of protests, and that's the main oil city in Iraq. I think Trump, the reason he puts pressure on Saudi Arabia is because he wants the Saudis to do it. He wants the Saudis to be the ones who flood the market. And from his perspective, he says, look, I took Iran out of the game. I want you guys now can take the market share. The Saudis are not seeing it that way with regards to Donald Trump. I think the oil is there. There is the capacity to fill those 2 million barrels if OPEC genuinely decided to do so. However, the problem is OPEC are not necessarily happy with the treatment of Iran. They're not with the American treatment of Iran. They're not necessarily happy with the situation that they've been made in, whereby the usual diplomatic channels have not been respected. So, for example, when Donald Trump takes to Twitter and tells them, OPEC, I'm telling you, before you meet, you have to bring the prices down. This has made it a bit sort of a humiliation for OPEC if it decides to go with what Donald Trump has said. Donald Trump could have done what US has done in the past, send some diplomatic back channels to the various different governments, let rumors spread here and there that maybe US is applying pressure. But the brazen way which Trump has done it has evoked a lot of sympathy, one for Iran and its loss of its share of the market in terms of loss of its particular exports, and also has made OPEC quite jittery. It's not a united bloc anymore, and there's a lot of antagonism between the various different countries, particularly as they wrestle with one of the leading OPEC nations, Saudi Arabia, having to sit in front of them and tell them, guys, Donald Trump told me to bring the oil prices down, we have to do so. I think with regards to filling the 2 million barrels, to summarize, I think they'll find a way to do so if they have to. But I don't think OPEC countries are at the stage yet whereby they want to follow the orders of Donald Trump.
So it's basically, you're saying it's payback time for the Saudi government there. Now, Manouchehr, is it, if we look at OPEC, we have big Iran that is not going to produce oil anymore, at least it's not going to be traded internationally. You have Saudi Arabia that's under pressure, but then you have also a lot of problems. Venezuela is not able to produce as much anymore. Libya can produce one day yes, one day no, depending on what's happening. The same is situation with Nigeria. So it's also, there's a lot of problems within OPEC itself. And I don't know, but from the outside, you get a feeling that there's a lot of fragility within OPEC at the moment because of geopolitical situations.
Well, I again say that there is, in spite of all the politics that you are mentioning and the media portray, within OPEC countries, the member countries, they sit together and discuss things as in a business way and out of these political issues. I come back to the question you asked me before. I want to, if you allow me, two things.
Yes, absolutely.
One is that the agreement in OPEC as a group and now together with non-OPEC is voluntary. So they all agree to do this because it is good for all of them. It is no enforcement. This is one thing. And then coming back to the question of what countries can produce, assuming that OPEC as a group decide to increase and agree with each other to increase supply. The nominal figure, which is in the press, is 2 million barrels per day spare production capacity of Saudi Arabia. There is a smaller extent, a smaller quantity apparently available spare capacity in the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait, but one doesn't know that much. Doesn't know so much. It is small. The main key player in that scenario would be Saudi Arabia, which nominally has about 2 million. Everyone is talking about. I want to mention this point, that this, if it comes to the crunch that Saudi Arabia would like to, or decides to increase, it is not guaranteed that technically this spare capacity can be brought on the stream quickly and on a streamline without any problems to go up 2 million barrels per day of supply from next week or next month into the world market without problem. There is great possibility that it may not be actually 2 million barrels per day spare capacity available to put the key on, to put it on and off. And I tell you, if you allow me, one experience. Between 1980, in 1979-80, Saudi Arabia did produce almost 10 million barrels per day in those years. And for the following 10 years, the nominal figure that everyone accepted in the press was that Saudi Arabia's oil production capacity was 10 million barrels per day. And in 1990, in August, when Saddam Hussein forces entered Kuwait, the world put an embargo and decided not to buy oil from Kuwait and Iraq. So 5 million barrels per day of oil was lost from the world market. And Saudi Arabia decided in a crash, very interesting program, put all the experts, engineers to try to increase production within the next 6 months or so. And they did the best they could, the best technology, the best engineering, planning, and so on. And yet, 6 months later, in early 1991, they reached 8.5 million barrels per day. So their nominal capacity, which was 10, at the time they were producing but 5.5. They thought, oh, there will be 5 million barrels per day coming out of Saudi Arabia to compensate for the loss of oil from Kuwait and Iraq, and yet it was 8.5 and not 10 million barrels per day. So I have, my view is that the extra spare capacity of nominally 2 may not actually be available, maybe 1.5 or as such, and it will take some time to bring them, demothball them, and get all these wells which have been closed, starting producing all the surface facilities to get together and working. It is not like a switch to put on and off. This is on a technical issue that we have, which we can't just assume it will come. But on the policy issue, as we have discussed already among the three of us here, there is a question. It seems to be that the Saudis would not be observant and obeying what the Americans are saying, and most probably they will go along with the rest of the OPEC and not push for a higher production. But again, I say this decision will be on the 3rd of December when they all meet, not now.
Well, and Mikhail, briefly, because we're reaching the end of the show, a 10-second answer. What do you think is going to happen with Iran's oil? I mean, it has all this surplus, right, on it.
Russia said on several occasions that it is ready to buy Iranian oil and to resell it on the global market. But I do not believe it can be practical.
Okay, well, this is certainly, as Manouchehr said, tomorrow's meeting is one step, but the big decisions will be taken in Vienna at the end of the year. So I just want to thank my guests for this show, and we'll talk again very soon. Mikhail Krutihin, Manouchehr Takin, and Sami Hamdi, thank you very much. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/aljazeera. facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hoda Abdel Hamid, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.